Nick, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Super excited to chat. I mean, you're such a prolific writer, and like what has stuck out for me from your work is your consistency and your discipline. And you're really one of the few people I know who's pushing out so much work. Um, so just wanted to give you your flowers for that because it's not easy to sit down every day and write for a significant amount of time.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's I've been having a funny moment lately. There's a bunch of new writers coming up on Twitter these days, and it's really fun to watch them get into their flow, figure out what's resonating with people, start to build products. Um I've seen a lot of cycles. I started writing on Quora in 2014. I started writing on the internet in 2007, but I really started to find my way in this game of social writing around 2014. And I remember this whole crew of writers coming up, 2014, 15, 16 on Quora. Then I made new friends and a whole other group of people on Medium 2016, 2017, 2018. Somewhere in there, I was writing. I was a columnist for Inc. magazine. There's a bunch of writers that were writing for Inc. magazine and other publications that were all sort of coming up around that same time, 2018, 2019. And it's just cool. Like the more that you write, the more that you see these different groups of creators and groups of people um, become friends, and they all sort of rise together. And then they all go different directions. Sometimes they stick around. Sometimes they change platforms. They're like, I didn't really want to write. I want to go make videos now. Sometimes they start a business. The business takes over, and then their writing takes a back seat. And sometimes they just get burned out and quit. And they rose really quickly, and then they just sort of fall off. And so, yeah. Anyway, long-winded way of saying thank you, I guess. But yeah, it's just been really interesting now that I'm over a decade in this, seeing these new groups of people pop up. And the question I always ask myself is, I'm like, are you going to be here in 2 years?
Mm.
Because I've seen a lot of really great creators rise really quickly and then fall really quickly. Sometimes by their own choice, sometimes just by the nature of how the game works. But yeah, always excited to share more of what I'm learning because I plan on playing this game for a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that planning to play the game for a long time is one of the important pieces to not getting burnt out and to staying in this game, because if you don't have that long enough time frame and you're doing this for a year and things aren't clicking, you feel that temptation to quit. Do you ever feel that for yourself? Was there ever a point for you where you were like that, where you weren't getting the results that you were looking for?
Constantly. I mean, in a way, I still feel it today. I mean, there's there's things today where I feel like my talents as a writer are way above even some of the things that I can point to that I've accomplished. Like the fact that I haven't had a book sell a million copies yet, like, blows my mind, because I know that I am entirely capable. Like, I know that there's essentially no skill gap between what I'm able to do and what people who write books that sell a million copies do. And so when I see that, I'm constantly reminded, part of that could be true, and part of that could also not be true. There might be other skills that I think I have that I actually don't have, or there might be things that I need to try that I haven't tried yet. And so, yeah, as much as I've done and as much as I've achieved, I'm kind of in a perpetual state of, well, why haven't I done that yet? Um, and I think when I was younger, I just turned 33 yesterday. Actually, yesterday was my birthday.
Congratulations. Happy birthday.
Thanks. Uh, when I was younger, I think I was more in my head about it. I was like, every little step held so much significance. And if something didn't go the way that I thought it was going to go, I would have to sit down and re-question the whole path. And I think the benefit of getting older and the benefit of doing something over a long period of time is you get desensitized to those things. You don't put as much emphasis on every single step. You don't have to get every single thing right. And in fact, if you don't get something right, you almost learn more from that than you do if something just happened to go the way that you thought it was going to go. So yeah, I feel myself in a very different place now. When I was younger, I was really struggling to figure out what I wanted to do with all of this. And now I have that clarity, and now it's just a matter of constant acceleration, constant practice. It's basically just don't stop at this point. There's not a whole lot to like think about anymore. It's just don't stop.
Just don't stop. That's a great lesson. And on that point, do you have a favorite failure or a failure that at the time seemed like it was really going to pull you back and be a negative, and then in hindsight, looking back, it was something that really propelled you to a lot of success in what you're doing now?
Too many to count. But one that really comes to mind is publishing my first book. My first book was a memoir called Confessions of a Teenage Gamer, and it was about when I was a teenager. I was one of the highest ranked World of Warcraft players in North America, and I was sort of this like mini online celebrity in this very niche gaming world, specifically, and not even gaming in general, just World of Warcraft, like niche of niche of niche. But then I would go to school and I was really antisocial, didn't have a group of friends, didn't know that I had celiac disease till I was 18, was really sick, really depressed. One of the byproducts of not knowing that you have celiac, if you don't know and you continue to eat gluten and wheat and the thing that you're allergic to, it actually triggers something in your brain that essentially causes depression. And so not only was I constantly sick, but I was constantly depressed, like borderline suicidal all the time. And I didn't know what was causing it. And the only thing that made me happy was gaming. And so it was a really interesting life chapter. And I wrote a book about it because I felt like it was just unique, but B, I felt like a lot of teenagers could probably resonate with the themes in that story. You know, feeling like you don't fit in, feeling like you can recreate yourself on the internet, feeling like you have all this potential, but your parents want you to do something different with it. You know, all of these things that you sort of just struggle with as a teenager. And I spent like 4 or 5 years on this book, a long time. And then I had high hopes for it. I sort of thought, you know, I'm going to spend 4 or 5 years on this thing. It's going to be my masterpiece. I'm going to put it out into the world, and everyone's going to realize what a great writer I am. And then I hit publish, and the book sold like a couple hundred copies, you know, and I had like a small following on Quora, and I didn't really have an email list, and I wasn't like doing any of the things that you were supposed to do, but I had these really massive expectations. And it was weird because I was proud of myself for writing it and publishing it. I think emotionally, it was a massive moment of growth for me. It allowed me to let go of a lot of the things that I was feeling. But at the same time, monetarily, it was a huge failure, you know, and that book barely like didn't make me any money really. And it wasn't the thing that allowed me to quit my job, and it didn't really advance me in the direction I wanted to go in terms of life. You know, I was living in a dump of a studio apartment in Chicago. Like it didn't solve any of my problems. And so it was a very weird moment for me where I was really proud of myself, and also because it was quote unquote a failure in terms of outcomes, I had to really go back to the drawing board and rethink, like, what do I want to do here? Like, if is my goal to make money off of writing, Or is my goal to just write the things that I want to write and I don't care about the outcome? And that push-pull is something I talk about all the time now when we teach writers. And, we have this program, Ship 30 for 30, and I've trained a ton of writers and I write about writing. And, that's the central theme. The central theme that every writer struggles with is, I want to write what I want to write. And then they say they don't care about the outcome, just like me. I was like, I want to write this book. I don't care about the outcome. But then the outcome comes, and then you're disappointed in the outcome. And so you have to decide from the beginning, which one are you really optimizing for? And that has been a huge lesson for me, is that those are two different paths, and sometimes they intersect, but usually, especially in the beginning, those are two completely different choices.
And how do you overcome that push-pull? Like, is that something that you're still dealing with, or do you come to a point of acceptance and being able to do things truly out of love, despite, or whether or not it's going to be a New York Times bestseller?
It's a great question. The brutally honest answer is, I think it really comes down to, because the push-pull never goes away. I still feel it. And it really comes down to just what sort of life do you want to live for yourself. Some people take a lot of pride in the cliche starving artist archetype. Like they're like, I'm okay to work at the coffee shop, I'm okay to live in the dumpy studio apartment, and I'm just going to make my art, and hopefully the world gets it. Maybe they won't, but if this is all there is for me, that's fine. And I think for a while I thought that I was okay with that, and I really wasn't. It was there is no nobility in poverty, and I experienced it, and it was really hard, and I hated it. And on the other side is, if you want to unlock outcomes for yourself, if you want to increase your earning potential, you want to make more money, you want to connect with people that are doing exciting things, if you want to really accelerate your career, especially if you're in your 20s and early 30s, sort of by definition, you have to approach writing completely differently. You have to approach any craft completely differently, because you're learning the skill specifically to drive some sort of valuable outcome that other people care about. Writing is a vehicle for business, essentially. Whereas me writing that memoir was it was art. It was completely art. Like there was no part of me that was like, people are going to buy this book so that they can learn how to gain a skill so that they can improve their life and earning potential, right? And so I think that balance of art and business is very challenging for people. And the only solution that I've found is, you have to extend the time horizon. And I kept thinking that I needed to do both at the same time, or I needed to solve for both at the same time. And the reality is, I have found much more success going, let me solve for Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Let me solve for my income and my ability to provide for myself first. And then once I have a firm grasp on that, then I can do more of the things that are just really fulfilling to me and are different bets. Art is a completely different bet. And that's hard for a lot of people. So it's hard for me.
Absolutely. And I feel like with a lot of people, and I'm sure you see this all the time within Ship 30, people have trouble finding their own unique voice and their quote unquote niche, I guess you will, and understanding what it is they want to talk about and having the confidence to do it in their own type of style. How do you think people should go about finding their voice? And I think I know your answer to this.
Well, there's tons of different ways that I can say this. I mean, the actionable way that we put it in Ship 30 is, you don't find your voice just sitting at your desk, which is what I did for years. I'm pretty sure I have 3 entire physical journals filled somewhere in my closet with me rewriting my bio and me writing my manifesto, and this is who I'm going to be, and this is what my voice is going to sound like. And I was always doing it in a vacuum, and I was just sitting at my desk trying to imagine what was going to work and who I was and what people were going to like. And what we tell people in Ship 30 is A, like that's a terrible strategy, never works. And B, a much more actionable strategy is you writing lots of things out in the world and gathering data and seeing what works. But the real shift, and as I have more of these types of conversations with people, I think an even easier way of thinking about it is your niche is not you. Like I see all the time when people say you are the niche, just be yourself. Okay, that's what my first memoir was. If I am the niche, it's like I was a pro gamer and I had celiac disease and I'm really competitive and I also was into bodybuilding and I'm a writer and I'm into writing. Just because those things are me doesn't mean that it's interesting to you. Right? And a much easier way of thinking about how do you quote unquote find your niche is you have to ask yourself, who is the person I'm trying to help? It's not you. It might be inspired by you, but you have to ask, who is the person I'm trying to help? It's someone else. And the magic of it is if you help someone else, the internet is responsible for finding all of the other people just like that one person. And usually that one person doesn't want help with 8 different things, right? We don't look for people to follow, or we don't buy books, or we don't buy products when someone goes, I can help you solve every aspect of your life. Right? When you want to work on your health, you buy a book from one person. When you want to work on your mindset, you buy a book from a different person. When you want to adopt a new exercise routine, one that helps you put on muscle is different than someone who helps you lose weight, right? Each one of these questions, you go to someone different because you want someone who specializes in that thing. What you don't want is the book that's like, I'm going to help you improve your mindset and improve your health and sleep better and have more fulfilling relationships and get promoted in your career. And it's too much, right? And no one person is going to be able to give you all of the most important information on all of those topics. And so the goal, the vehicle for getting there is write lots of different things and figure out which one do you actually like writing about the most and what's resonating with people. But the way to think about it is it's not about you. It's not about you and your own interests. It's about who's the person you're trying to help. And the person you're trying to help might have the same interest as you. That's fine. But you should focus on helping that person.
I love that frame because I've always been someone who thought the opposite of the niche is you. But it makes so much sense framing it the way you have. And I think about the podcast and it's like, because I'm doing this podcast out of love and I don't really, at the end of the day, I have such a wide time frame that I'm not too concerned about the numbers on April 20th, 2023. Like I'm more concerned on 33 in year 33. So because of that, I'm okay with being following my own curiosity and having people on from a ton of different areas of expertise. And I understand that that's not as scalable, but because I have such a large time horizon and I'm doing it out of love instead of out of growth, it's a perspective I'm taking. But I really think that if you're trying to optimize for success, that's the way to do it, is you have to write to somebody, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, so let's tie these together. And this is for you too. In the beginning, the best way to learn is to just try things. So right now you're interviewing lots of different types of people and you're seeing what you enjoy. No different than in the beginning. I was like, I don't really know what kind of writer I want to be. But for right now, this story of me as a teenager seems really interesting. Let me go try that, right? Eventually, though, you are going to get to a point where what you are doing is no longer unlocking the outcome that you desire. So you're going to keep interviewing people and you're going to go, I enjoy it, I enjoy it, I enjoy it. And then all of a sudden one day you're going to wake up and you're going to go, yeah, I enjoy it, but where's the XYZ? Why is my podcast not making me money? Why am I not able to connect with the next tier of guests? You know, why am I not, right? And you're going to start thinking about the external outcomes. And in that decision, fundamentally, you're going to have to stop operating from a place of, I'm just doing whatever and I'm just doing it because I enjoy it, to I need to take a more quote unquote, not even disciplined, but just a like a more
Deliberate,
targeted, a more targeted approach of who is this for and why, right? Because right now you're sort of doing it for you, which is great. It's great in the beginning, but eventually the decision is going to be, who is the listener that I'm really doing this for? And then you're going to go through the specificity exercise, the niching down exercise, which is right now you're going, I'm talking to anyone who's interesting. And then maybe over time you go, you know what? I actually really like talking to high performers. And then over time you go, actually, I really like talking to high performers who were in one career and then transitioned into another career. And then maybe underneath that, you go, actually, it's not just any career change. I actually really want to talk to high performance athletes who transition into some sort of creative career after they're done playing sports. And then you go, no, it's actually not all athletes. It's just basketball players. I just want to talk with basketball players that make the transition over into something creative, right? And notice the difference for a listener who goes, right now it's listen to Ryan. Well, who's Ryan? Right? And then you go, well, let me get more specific. This is for high performers. And the listener's like, well, there's a gazillion podcasts that talk to high performers, right? And then you get all the way down to something really specific and you go, no. This podcast is specifically about how pro athletes make the transition out of playing professional basketball into something creative. Hyper specific. You're going to rule out 99.9% of people, but that's the point. And then all of a sudden, the target listener is going to go, wow, this is exactly what I was looking for. And now you can build an ecosystem and a business and a suite of products and all sorts of things around that specifically. And the only way that you can get there, whether, like, I'm just using it as an example, right? Wherever you land, but the only way that you can get there is you have to let go of the I'm what's important, right? Because it's not about you anymore. And you're not doing it because you're like, I'm doing what I enjoy, which is what I was doing in the beginning. And I think that's a really direct way of saying it, but that's a hard thing for people to wrap their head around. And even if I explain that to someone, they can't fully internalize it in the first year or two. It's very rare that someone hears that and goes, I now know what to execute on, because it's like your soul has to like go through this growth process where you're like, I'm following my curiosity. And then eventually you get to a point where you're like, my curiosity is not getting me the thing that I want. And so then the way that you think about it has to change. And then it's only after you've gone through the niching down process and the specificity and you realize that it's not about you anymore, that then you can come out the other side and go, cool, now how do I inject some of my personality back into this? Right? How do I find the middle ground? And that's the journey. It's like you start thinking it's all about you. The middle is, wait, it has nothing to do with me. It only has to do with the listener and who I'm trying to help. And then the end is, now that I understand the extremes on both sides, I can find a happy middle ground. But that takes time.
And the path gets clear as you start taking more steps to it. And just
Always.
daily showing up is going to ultimately be the thing that allows you to have the awareness to know what then that final step is, that you're ultimately talking to basketball players that are transitioning into creative pursuits. And you only get there through putting in the work and putting in those years before of understanding. Would you say that that's true? Or would you?
Yeah. Because how else are you supposed to know, right? How are you supposed to know who you enjoy talking to unless you go talk to 100 people? How was I supposed to know what I enjoyed writing about the most without writing 3,000 articles on the internet? And so I think that's why it's so important you have to have both. You have to have the overarching perspective. That's what I'm really passionate about. I want to pass along these ways of thinking and these frameworks to other up and coming writers, but I can't just give you the answer, right? Because even when I explain the answer, if I was hearing what I'm hearing now as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, I wouldn't be able to understand it. It would just be a little seedling placed in my brain, and I would still have to go do the work. And then because I've got that buried somewhere, a year or two later, it's going to sprout, and out of nowhere, it's going to land. And that's why you can't just sit and read the books and listen to the podcasts and be like, I've got it all figured out at my desk. Now I can go set off on my perfect magical journey. It's going to be messy either way. It's important to recognize that, like, that's the point. Like, even today, I write things new and I go, I had no idea I enjoyed writing that. Maybe I should do more of that. Right. So you're always in this perpetual exploration mode. It's just at some point, you have to be really honest with yourself and go, one of these things that I'm writing about is unlocking all the outcomes. And for me, that was digital writing. For years, I didn't want to write about writing. Like, I wanted to write about other things. I wanted to write about mastery and personal development and spirituality and meditation, all these other things that I was really interested in. But the topic that that was showing signs of unlocking all of the outcomes for me was writing about writing, because I was really good at articulating how I think about these things. And I was really good at creating frameworks for how I do what I do. And 2.5, 3 years ago, I had to have a a come to Jesus moment, a really real, like, talk with myself of going, if you want these outcomes, you have to double down. You have to burn the boats and say, this is the data point that's showing the most promise. Go all in on it. And I did. And now it's like, I can't stop the outcomes from unlocking themselves, And so I think that moment of decision is very hard for people, because they think that means they're stuck forever. And you're not. You can always change it. But you're going to have to get specific at some point, and you're going to have to let go of the fact that it has nothing to do with you.
It's such an interesting perspective, because I've heard the other side of it so much, and I haven't really heard people talk about this side of it as much. And there's obviously exceptions to the rules. You see people like Joe Rogan, who talks about almost anything and everything. But as you think about that, he's more the exception to the rule than the rule. And he did that for, I want to say, 5+ years, the podcast I'm saying, before he had made any type of money from it. So I think that when you do things in a more niched way, it allows you to open up the doors much quicker.
A question that my business partner, Dickie, and I talk about all the time is, when you look at something, is it successful because of that? Or is it successful despite of that?
That's a great question.
Right. And I think a lot of times up and comers, and especially beginners, but even people who are halfway through, advanced, coming up in their careers, they look at success stories and they don't even ask that question. They just look at someone and go, well, that's what they did, so I'm sure that's what must work. First of all, you aren't that person, right? It's like you're not. So you shouldn't be like, the variables are not the same. That is not a clean science experiment, you know? But second is, I always love asking that question, which is, are they successful because of that or despite that? And a lot of times you don't even realize the mistake that you're making. Like, for example, here's a really, really easy one. Most people, when they start a podcast, they start a blog, when they start writing on Twitter, when they launch a product, whatever, they name it after themselves. The Nicolas Cole podcast, right? Okay, so let's just stress test this for a second. Ryan, do you want to go out to dinner tonight?
No.
Okay, just say yes.
Yes.
You want to go out to dinner tonight? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Do you want to go to Angelina's?
I have no idea what Angelina's is.
I have no idea what Angelina's is. What's the next question you ask?
What type of food do they have?
Angelina's has Italian food. Do you like Italian food or do you want something different?
I want something different because my friend Nick has celiac and they don't really have too many great options there.
Amazing, right? So we should probably go get sushi instead.
Much better option.
All right, great. So let's go get sushi. All right. So now I'm going to take you to the best sushi restaurant. All right, I'll take you to, if we're in LA, I take you to Koi. Okay. Notice what just happened.
Mm-hmm.
The first question I asked is if you want to go to Angelina's, and you go, I don't know what Angelina's is. And in order for you to decide whether or not you want to go to Angelina's, you need to know what it is. So when someone names if I name my podcast, the Nicolas Cole podcast, every single person's first question is, what's Angelina's? Right? But if I name my podcast, the Digital Writing Podcast, everyone who's interested in Italian food, right, goes, I'm interested in category Italian food. Then I'm interested in, well, and what's the best restaurant inside that category, right? And that simple example is so hard for people to wrap their head around. And it's very hard in the beginning because you're still in the phase of, I'm doing it because I love it. And I'm just exploring, right? And when you're just exploring, you're in this sort of magical space where you just sort of think everything's going to work out. And that's okay. And you should be in that place. But eventually, you're going to come to a point where you realize that running around saying, listen to me, is not the best strategy. And just because Joe Rogan's podcast is named the Joe Rogan podcast doesn't mean that that's what you should be doing day one, because you're making it harder for people to understand what type of food do you serve. And that's it's such a so simple, it's complicated thing. But now that I'm on the other side and I've gone through that journey and I understand the mental pain of that in the beginning. That's why I try and plant all these seeds for people, because I'm like, you're gonna get it eventually, but right now you're driving yourself insane because you just sort of think, as long as I just follow my heart, it's all gonna work out. And like, it does and it doesn't. At some point, you have to crystallize what you're doing and you have to make it clear who you're trying to help and why.
And outside of just putting in the work and taking steps towards that ultimate vision to then have more clarity, like, what advice would you have for that person on, like myself, I'm on podcast episode number 70. I'm super broad. What advice would you have to crystallize that vision and to start taking steps towards unlocking what it is exactly that you should be talking about?
So 2 things. One, looking for objective patterns. So objectively, which episodes did you enjoy recording the most? and objectively which episodes performed the best, which ones got the most comments where people were like, this was amazing to listen to. And not just the data, not just this got more views, this got more listens, this got more comments, but the quality of the feedback. Like, which episodes did people go, the way that you broke this topic down was amazing? Or after listening to this podcast, I have these handful of questions. You know, you're looking for like, what are people really showing interest in? And does it overlap with your interests? You also really enjoyed having that conversation. So you're like, oh, maybe there's a sweet spot there. And the second part is you then have to plant your flag somewhere. You're not going to get it right the first time, or maybe the second time, or maybe the third time. You can keep moving your flag. But once you see that overlap, you have to practice the skill of going, I'm going to make this my thing now. And you double down on it, and you name that, and you go, this is who it's for, and this is who I'm trying to help, and these are the guests that I'm going to get, and this is what I'm digging into. And then after 3 months, you're going to realize, oh, there's actually a niche within this niche that I'm really interested in. You do it again, name it again, claim it again. And it's only in the naming and claiming of it and the doubling down that you learn the skill of how that works. Whereas I think a lot of people start gathering the data and then they are so afraid to name and claim anything that they never actually complete the loop of practicing the full skill. It's not just the gathering of the data. It's the data, and then you have to double down on something, and then you have to see, is that unlocking the outcomes that I desire? Yes or no? Okay, great. Something different. Move the flag again. Move the flag again.
It's so interesting, and I'm applying it now as you say that to my own podcast and the success I've seen in a few different directions. And at first, early on, like first 20 episodes, I had maybe 3 guys on the show who were into like the world of bodybuilding, and specifically like functional bodybuilding for people who want to get the aesthetics of bodybuilding, but also want to have the functionality of moving well and being able to be flexible and do yoga. And one of those episodes performed incredibly well. And I think still it's my best performing episode. And from there, I could see how, because it had such a disproportionate amount of listeners, it then turned people to those other episodes that were within that same niche. And then from there, I had the clarity of, oh shit, that's a direction I could go in and probably have a lot of success. It was, just to your point, like ultra niche down. And I'm sure even if I kept pursuing that, it would become more and more niche down. But the thing with me was I was like, I don't think that is the thing for me. It just didn't seem to be the thing that I love talking about as much. And do you think that then that should be the thing that you pursue? Maybe even if you're starting to see this disproportionate amount of listeners for this one type of episode, but it's not the episodes that you enjoy recording the most. What do you think that I should do in that?
Yeah, I mean, that is essentially the choice. An opportunity revealed itself. It's up to you whether you want to follow it and build around it. But even just listening to you talk, you basically just named the niche, the category, and the point of view. The Functional Bodybuilding Podcast, where you learn how to put on muscle but stay flexible, take care of your joints, do yoga. It's like become a bodybuilder, but without all of the bad things that come with bodybuilding, right? Yep. Okay, so boom, you have an answer, clarity, right? And that becomes a choice. And I think as I continue just learning myself and stress testing my own frameworks, an opinion that I have here is, if you want to be some sort of creator, or you want, or entrepreneur, or you want to create or build something of your own in the world, an idea where you have the most clarity around the category is almost always the best idea. Like, you're better off following a category that you can pinpoint very exactly, rather than pursuing a category that you don't have as much clarity in, but you're like, but it's fun. It's like, again, that's fine, but then don't be surprised if you follow the second one and it doesn't unlock the outcomes that you want. Clarity of category is the whole game. It's the single point of failure. And if you don't have clarity on it and you can't name it, then no reader, no listener, no customer is going to be able to recognize it or want to spend time in it. And so as I continue writing and creating new data points for myself, the question I'm always asking is, which one of these has the most clarity? Because if I can see it and go, I immediately understand. Functional bodybuilding, it takes me half a millisecond to understand that, right? Tons of clarity, that's probably my best idea. And until another one emerges and gives you the same level of clarity or more, that's probably where the opportunity is for now. And you can build that out and you can do whatever you want with it. And then if 3 years from now, another data point emerges and another category you have even more clarity around and you're even more excited about it, go do something different. But the game is, where do I have the most clarity and what are people going to be able to recognize the easiest?
It's so true. I mean, yesterday I had a podcast episode in person. It was one of like the biggest guests I've had, and they asked me like the simple question of, what's my elevator pitch for the podcast? Like, what is my one sentence thing that I want people to get out of the show? And I blanked out because I don't have that clarity. And as you're saying that, this is almost like a therapy session, it feels like, because that clarity is the missing component and the point that I think so many people are missing.
Yeah, and notice when we were talking and I said, which episodes perform the best, you already knew. You could pinpoint what the topic and category was, and you had the one sentence elevator pitch without problem. You're like, oh, it was functional bodybuilding, and it was for people who want to put on weight, but want to also be able to do yoga and take care of their joints and have flexibility. If all you did was run around and say that, it would be way easier for people to fall into your rabbit hole because there's exponentially more clarity. Whereas most people, it's like, what do you write about? Or what's your podcast about? Or what? And they're like, it's about the things I'm passionate about. What the other person is thinking in their brain is like, cool, I am never going to give you my attention because it's all about you. Right? Or if someone's like, oh, my podcast is about interviewing interesting people on interesting topics. Reader, listener immediately is like, cool, I don't care. Right? But if you go, and my podcast it's called the Functional Bodybuilding Podcast, and I talk with functional bodybuilders and health experts on how to put on size, but also maintain flexibility and balance in your life or whatever it is. 9 out of 10 people are going to go, that's really cool, but that's not for me. And 1 out of every 10 people is going to go, oh my God, that's exactly the podcast I was looking for. Where can I subscribe? Also, do you have a book? Also, do you have a course I can buy? Also, do you have a community? Also, do you have right? And that's the point. The point is the polarity.
It's funny because as you just said that word, like, oh, do you have a book? Immediately, the book that I want to write, like the one that's in my mind, it would be called Zen and the Art of Bodybuilding. And it would be a book about mindful training. So it's funny. It's funny hearing these things and creating that clarity.
Yeah, and I would encourage you to take that a step further and make the title Zen and the Art of Functional Bodybuilding.
Whew.
Right? Because the whole point is, it's not bodybuilding, it's functional body. It's the niche within the niche. And like, Again, so simple, it's complicated. 2 words, functional bodybuilding. Everything else comes off of those 2 words. I make the joke that I used to get paid as a ghostwriter to write lots of words. People would be like, I need an 800 word article, or I need a 13,000 word white paper, or I need whatever. And now I get paid to write 2 or 3 words, because the whole everything comes off of the 1, 2, 3 words that say, what category are you? And if you don't know the 1, 2, or 3 words that is, this is the category that I'm in, everything else that you do doesn't have clarity. Right? Whereas if you go, it's functional bodybuilding. Now you have a book, The Zen and the Art of Functional Bodybuilding. And then you have a course, Functional Bodybuilding in 7 days. And then you have an opt-in. Over the next 5 days, I'm going to teach you the basics, crash course of functional bodybuilding. And then all of your ads. Hey, are you interested in functional bodybuilding? It's the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, because you are in the business not of saying, come to Angelina's. You're in the business of, do you love Italian food? Come to Angelina's. And that small difference is like what every even really smart people, they just can't wrap their head around it.
And then I think what people miss as well is that like you can go super niche and then slowly go wider.
Yeah, of course.
And I think people are scared they're going to pigeonhole themselves too much. And I think it's definitely my own fear is that like if I do that, then I won't be able to have a conversation with someone like yourself, because then you're out of my niche.
Yeah, no. I mean, there's a great way of visualizing this is when I used to live in LA, I used to, people would have these really cool dinners up in the hills, like entrepreneurs or whoever that had really cool houses up in Hollywood Hills. They would have these little private dinners. And I remember going to a handful of these, and it'd be like 12 or 15 people there, and every type of industry. Like I went to one where I'm sitting next to, an entrepreneur with a $100 million agency, but next to me is also like Lady Gaga's fashion designer. And then next to that person is like runs some giant music festival. And like each person is really accomplished, but in totally different industries. And what's cool about those environments is when you achieve any sort of quote unquote success in your vertical, every person in every other vertical just sort of assumes that you can translate that success. Right? It's why like pro athletes think that they can launch beverage companies, or it's why massive influencers think that they can just go start something new, right? Because it's like, well, I was successful here, so there's kind of no reason why I don't think I can just like jump and do something different. Different conversation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the point is, once you achieve success in some sort of vertical, you can always expand from it, because everyone else who's achieved success in every other vertical wants to connect with other people who were successful in their vertical, right? So a great example for us is, okay, we have doubled down and are very much creating the category of digital writing. No one's called it digital writing before. It's always just been writing, or like you write on the internet. Digital writing has a completely different set of rules. But then from digital writing, I can go ghostwriting, and I can go copywriting, and I can go persuasion, and I can go all of these other tangential categories, but through the lens of digital, through the lens of I'm doing this, but digitally, right? So someone else might have copywriting secrets that are amazing for direct mail, right? I'm going to talk about copywriting as it relates to digital writing. So you can always take your category and expand it. But what doesn't work is you coming out the gate going, I am something for everyone. Everyone should love what I'm doing. No, not everyone loves what you're doing. And if you're trying to create something for everyone, you are creating something for no one. No one sees themselves in what you're doing.
It's a great message. It's a great message, and something I'm definitely going to need to think a lot about. But so let's say once you have that foundation clarity and you have this thing, how do you then tell great stories and are able to push your message in a very deliberate way, in a way that's cohesive, that makes sense? And how do you write on the internet in a good way? I know it's such a broad question.
So I'll pull this up real quick. So this is one of my favorite frameworks as of late. Is I call it the 10 magical ways that you can expand anything. And the 10 are tips, stats, steps, lessons, benefits, reasons, mistakes, examples, questions, and personal stories, which is some sort of transformation. And when you list those things out, it's like I can watch it as it happens. As I start listing them out, people's eyes glaze over and they're like, yeah, cool, that makes sense. But they don't actually understand how powerful this is. So I'll give you an example. If you wanted to start writing about or creating content around functional bodybuilding, immediately you're confronted with the blank page problem. What do I write? Right? And again, most people start from a place of, what do I want to write? So you're like, I'm writing about functional bodybuilding. What do I think? And that's the wrong place to start, because you aren't writing for you. You are, but you're not. You're writing for a reader, and a reader has specific wants and needs. Why do we click on the things we click on? Why do we watch the things that we watch? Because we want something in return, right? That's the trade. So you create something, I come across it. You're saying, pay attention to the thing I created. The question I'm asking myself is, if you're going to take 30 seconds of my life, it's a big ask, right? You want 30 seconds of my life. I'm asking myself, what do I get in return? And as a reader, as a listener, as a customer, the things that people want, what do they want? They want tips, stats, steps, lessons, benefits, reasons, mistakes, examples, questions, transformation stories, right? So you have to start from a place of, what does the reader want? Not what do I want to say? Okay. So then if you start from a place of, what does the reader or the listener want, you just go down the list. So let's plug in topic functional bodybuilding. Okay. Tips to get started functional body training like a functional bodybuilder, right? Stats that show why functional bodybuilders live longer than regular bodybuilders. Steps to creating your first functional bodybuilding routine. Lessons you will learn after functional bodybuilding for 10 years, and all the ways that it is better for you. Benefits of functional bodybuilding as opposed to CrossFit. Benefits of functional bodybuilding as opposed to regular bodybuilding. Benefits of functional bodybuilding opposed to running marathons, right? Reasons why you should get into functional bodybuilding versus insert any of the others. Mistakes beginner functional bodybuilders make in the beginning, avoid these, right? Examples of successful functional bodybuilders, and then insert success story. Questions you should ask yourself if you're trying to decide, should I go the functional bodybuilding route or should I go the legacy bodybuilding route, right? Personal story. Here's my experience putting myself through a functional bodybuilding routine for 30 days and what you can learn from it. So you literally just insert topic, boom. And those are just quick variations of each one. Each one of those, you could have 100 things you could say, right? Tips to start doing this, tips to start doing this, tips to start doing this. So the biggest mental unlock for people is, when you sit down to write, you are not writing for yourself. Again, it goes back to it's like the 3 parts of the journey. In the beginning, you think it's about you. In the middle, you think it's only about the reader. And eventually you come to a point where you realize it's the combination of both. But it's the reader who's more important, and you are in the back seat.
That's all the content you need, really, if you think about it. Like, you just laid out months worth of content, and then there's infinite amount of deviations that you could do from that whole picture.
Yes.
Where do people get stuck?
They get stuck thinking that it's harder than that. And it's not. And it goes back to I want to sit at my desk and I need to brainstorm the whole journey and I need to make sure that it's all perfect. I can't tell you how many times I've tweeted about, written about, talked about, explained those 10 magical ways. And people just go, yeah, thanks, but no. And they think it's something different. And it's almost like, I think it might be human nature where when it's something that you really care about, you're like, I really want to be a writer, or I really want to be a podcaster, or I really want to be a creator, or I really want to build something. You think it needs to be hard. Like if it feels easy, that means that you're doing something wrong, or that you're taking some shortcut, or that it's not going to be the thing that it needs to be or you want it to be. But it is not that hard. It is that easy. And I wish someone had broken it down like that for me 10 years ago. And then the second part of it is literally just discipline. Like people do it for 2 or 3 days and then they just stop and they're like, "Oh, I didn't become overnight famous in 3 days." It's like that wasn't the goal, and B, that was a completely unreasonable expectation. And so that is why, for example, Ship 30, like the program we've built, a huge component of it is that accountability piece. Because a lot of times I've tweeted this over and over again, is most people don't have a talent problem. They have a consistency problem. They know what they need to do. They actually are more than capable, but they can't get themselves to do it for longer than 48 hours. I actually don't think that I am the most talented writer. I think there's a lot of people that are a lot more naturally talented than I am. But I also know that I will outwork everyone and I will play the game longer than everyone. And so a lot of times you don't need talent, doesn't have to be the differentiator. Sometimes just showing up more than everyone else is the differentiator.
It's not talked about enough. I mean, I really see that as the key factor that differentiates so many people, and just showing up and putting in the work. Like, I have a few friends who have these big dreams, but they don't consistently show up for them and make them happen. And as I get older, I start to realize more and more the importance of just being the hardest worker in the room. And that ultimately, like you said, it's not talent that's going to separate you. It's consistency.
Yeah, something I have been doing as of late, probably the last couple of years, because I guess quick preface, something that doesn't get talked about a lot is I think people think that it gets easier over time. It's like, oh, the more I achieve and the more followers I have, the more readers I have, the more customers I have, the more everything I have, the more that it gets easier. And it actually is the opposite. It actually gets harder. And as in the past, 2 years, as a lot of my writing has gotten more distribution than it's ever gotten, my books have done better than they've ever done. My second book, Art and Business of Online Writing, was way more successful than my first, which was my gaming memoir. Our businesses are growing tremendously, right? Like the more that things grow, it actually becomes easier and easier to get complacent. I got a house with a pool now. I can rationalize really, really easily not doing what I need to do and just going and laying in my pool. And that's the funny part, is that it doesn't get easier. It actually gets way harder to stay consistent and stay disciplined. And something that, like a mental trick I play on myself to keep me engaged, is I really like to remind myself, insert whatever you do. For me, it's writing. A world-class writer writes every day. And so if I rationalize with myself and I go, I don't really need to do that today, then I am not a world-class writer today. And I shouldn't think that I am. And I shouldn't call myself that. And I shouldn't believe that and if I don't for 2 days, well, world-class writer definitely doesn't not practice for 2 days. So that means I'm not anymore. And the other side is, I tell beginners all the time, like, you don't have to achieve some big grand outcome in order to be a writer. If you hit publish today, you are a writer. If you did something today, you are a writer. Congratulations. Today, you are a writer. But if tomorrow you don't, you're not a writer anymore. And I think that really binary way of thinking about it helps. It helps me. I feel like I've seen it help other people. Is it helps you be brutally honest with yourself. Whereas a lot of times people will go, I wrote something 7 years ago, but then they still introduce themselves as a writer. You're not a writer anymore. You're done. You're done. And so it's not about what you did historically. It's about what you're doing right now. And so, I mean, you say it with your friends. I've seen it with people in my life. Whenever someone's like, I have all these things I really want to do, I'll do them tomorrow. It's like, that person would do it today. So until you do it today, you are not that person. And so stop thinking you're that person, because you're not.
It's a great message. And it reminds me of yesterday I watched this short, like 10-minute documentary that J. Cole put out talking about his album, The Off Season.
Mm-hmm. I love that one.
Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And he talks about that same principle, that complacency and comfort are his enemy nowadays, because he's had the success and it's so easy for him to just live this comfortable life because he no longer has that thing he's running away from and that neighborhood he's trying to get out from. So when you lose that, it's hard to keep that drive. But that reframe that you said there, like holding on to that title and only giving yourself that title when you're actually doing the steps necessary to be that person, it's a great reframe.
And to be honest, that's what continues to inspire me. Like anytime I see someone else achieve something, I'm genuinely happy for them. I'm like, that's amazing. You're unlocking outcomes in your life. But then if weeks and months and years start going by and that's the only thing that they have, and they just sort of keep pointing to that thing, the more and more I'm like, you're washed up. Right? You're not
Truth,
doing the
yeah.
thing. You're not doing the thing anymore. And for someone, I plan on writing until the day I die or the day Alzheimer's kicks in and I can't, or maybe the Alzheimer's helped me write a great novel one day, who knows. But I'm going to do this until I'm gone. And so for me, I am inspired not by things people did and then stopped doing. I'm inspired by things people are doing right now and that they're actively pushing in themselves right now. And I think that's why I started the conversation with, like, I've seen a lot of cycles. I've seen a lot of cycles of people that get in the habit and they see some success and they create some really cool things. And I'm inspired by other people that are creating, but then they fall off and then they stop. And then they sort of keep this air about themselves where they're like, everyone should still pay attention to me because I did some really cool things 5 years ago, and I and everyone else is on to the next. And that's the whole game, is like, you are a writer every day that you are doing it. And you are a podcaster every day that you are doing it. And you are an entrepreneur every day that you are doing it. And the moment that you stop, the brutal reality is you are not anymore. You used to be. I used to be a writer. And I think that level of personal accountability is really important.
It really is. And that's a great way to bring this conversation full circle. Nick, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been such a blast. And I wanted to end here by asking you a selfish question, which is, what's a challenge that you can give me for a next step to start taking more clarity into things that I'm doing and the things I'm pursuing?
Name and claim something in the next 3 months.
Name and claim something in the next 3 months. And I challenge the audience to do the same. Nick, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was great.